Right?
Yep. And then, so yeah, that should be on there now. So you're all set.
All right. Good morning. Our presentation this morning is going to be regarding the philosophical concepts surrounding cultural exchange. So we'll go ahead and jump into an activity. Troy will go ahead and explain to you guys what to do.
Yeah, so this will be pretty basic. Once we put flies, Mr. Morris. Okay, cool. So what this activity is going to be, think about your culture, whatever you identify yourself as, and then draw yourself a mascot, like for your culture, to represent your culture within 2 minutes. That's all you have to do on your little piece of paper.
Do you need more? Hey, can I have that extra piece?
All right, you guys have 2 minutes starting now. Yeah. Yeah. I have to use yours. Okay. Brandon's because he's doing something interesting. Yeah. Here you go.
All right.
And let's see what you have.
Yeah, I saw a few good ones.
I know I did too. First of all, any volunteers?
Or I'm gonna go around and like snatch the good ones.
All right. You snatch the good ones?
What is that?
Wait, you can't cover it up.
No? Okay, whatever.
Well, first of all, do you want to snatch up the good ones first? All right. So, here's Natalia's. Can anyone guess what this is? It's a soccer playing cow. Any idea? Huh? Absolutely, yeah, totally. Because they export cow stuff and they play soccer, so it's got to be Argentinian, right? Hey, Eddie. You're a winner, Eddie.
Dang. All right, I got a few more. Man, what is this? What's Afro grapes?
Afro grapes.
Nice.
Wow. Wait, what are the grapes for? Oh yeah.
All right, this is Eddie. What is this? It's like a guy in like a sombrero with like a Mexican flag on it. Yeah, it's like a Mexican. Is this a guy pushing a lawnmower? That's Luis's. This is Ben's. Oh my god. What does this say, Ben? And Luis.
Wait, actually, can I see these for a second?
Wait, who's this?
No. Okay, so who made these? I need to know.
That's Toledo.
Okay, the one in your left hand's mine.
Okay, that's yours, and
Left.
this is yours, and this is yours. So, what heritage are your parents from?
I just put American because I can.
Oh, all right. And what about you, Bren? Mexican? and you put like people climbing the wall into the USA. So you consider the United States part of your culture, right? That's interesting. No one else did that. Everyone else identified solely as the culture of their parents. No one else put like United States. I mean, okay, yeah, the culture of your parents, right?
Well, I mean, not really. My parents are one of them's from Mexico, one of them's from.
Then why did you put? Okay, yeah. You just said you identified as Mexican. Okay, yeah. You know what? Great job, Kyle. That cultural exchange is very strong. You know what? I think you guys deserve. Kyle, you know what? You get a medal.
Show Kyle.
Ah! And Brandon, you get a trophy.
Oh. Alright. You guys get to see Kyle.
Oh, champions!
It's a hamburger holding a beer and a shotgun.
Alright.
Oh, so one of the cool things about this activity is that even though it seemed like a joke, well, it pretty much was. You guys kind of stereotyped yourselves. We didn't need to do anything. Yeah. You decided your own culture and you drew a mascot based on the stereotypes that you perceived your culture to be. So, yeah.
So we have some examples. This would probably be a Hindu person's if they were to make theirs. But it's interesting because the Hindu symbol of the swastika, which stands for like regeneration, has already been pretty much degraded by Hitler, taking away from its actual customary meaning. And then we have a few examples of the Redskins and the Indians, and it's actually interesting that we see the Washington Redskins kind of have a homage to the indigenous Indian tribes in their state, and then the Cleveland Indians have a more playful, comical mascot.
Yeah.
So,
And think about if you were to have this mascot actually represent your culture to the public eye, would you be okay with it? And would the people, your parents be okay with it? The people originally from your heritage themselves, itself, yeah.
all right.
So here's where we make a small definition of these are two major concepts. This is generally our real life situation. There's cultural exchange and cultural appropriation. In modern day, we've been having sustained focus on the role that culture plays, especially in developing countries, as people from other countries begin to move in and cultures begin to mix. There's these two concepts of cultural exchange and cultural appropriation. Cultural exchange is supposed to be seen as a natural part of globalization. It's a good thing where ideas are exchanged and cultures can both build themselves through this exchange. Cultural appropriation, on the other hand, is not considered cultural exchange because what it is a dominant culture taking aspects of a subordinate culture's culture. So, and it's seen as a form of oppression, even though often the people culturally appropriating don't mean it that way.
It's usually unintentional. It's just, you can look at it as, it's most often seen as like recreational use of a culture, but it kind of strips the meaning of the actual heritage of the people within that culture. So it's interesting. All right, so our knowledge issue then is to what extent is criticism of cultural appropriation valid? Is there a line between appreciation and exploitation? And there is. And we're going to go ahead and look at the limitations between exchange and appropriation. All right. So a lot of philosophy is revolved around ethics in its application. So you guys have seen this a lot, the different ethical principles of deontological ethics and consequentialist ethics, or it's also known as teleological. So deontological, you can think of duty. It has to do with obligation and rules. So if you're breaking the rules, then you're violating, you're deontologically unethical. And then consequentialist, you can think of consequences, and it's based on the net outcomes. And a lot of times, an example of that is a utilitarian approach to ethics, which is political, where you're thinking of the most benefits on the most people. So we also have some value theories, Platonic value theories. So we have intrinsic and instrumental value theories, And basically, intrinsic means that something has value in and of itself, and then instrumental has value towards something else outside of itself, if that makes sense. It should. So, cool.
All right. So to start this, to think about what we're going to talk about, you're going to need to take your head out of the Western canon and look from a global perspective, an IB-friendly perspective. So the Western culture values globalization. As we see now, the people in Geneva, they're like, wow, you got to speak different cultures, you have to understand different cultures, you have to understand their history. And we're trying to bring more cultural exchange into our Western tradition. But there's also a criticism where the idea of cultural exchange creates cultural assimilation, which many of us see as a good thing, but maybe cultural assimilation is a part of Eurocentrism, where because in reality, when you see people from other cultures come into the European or American states, which they usually were, you see with the refugees now, they have to assimilate to the European culture and the European standards, which are typically seen as the global standards. But why? This idea of assimilation comes from the idea that mixing cultures will promote acceptance, which is good in a state that has lots of different cultures, but it also degrades from the value of cultures on their own. So that's a problem that we're having. Here's a quote from Vladimir Putin, the great himself. And it says, in many countries today, moral and ethical norms are being reconsidered. Nations, national traditions, and differences in nation and culture are being erased. And this quote obviously has negative connotation with the language. We've already went over a presentation about language. So there's people in this world who are technically part of the Western tradition who see cultural assimilation as a bad thing. There's not just this one perspective where cultural assimilation is a good thing for all the people to mix together and be happy.
All right, so we have some questions for you guys, just for discussion before we get into our real life situations. So our first one is just getting your guys' take on whether or not globalization represents progress. So is it beneficial, or are there some?
Yeah. Is globalization beneficial in your Western perspective?
Talia?
Yes.
Well, I think in certain cases it can be beneficial, like when we met in the Montreal conference and we banned CFCs. That was something to preserve global health by protecting our ozone layer. But then in other cases, it can be negative to more indigenous places who are exploited. My heart goes out to Nigeria, whose oil mines are not owned by the people, instead they're owned by Western industry. And that's something that we see exploitation, but yet there's the chance for us to meld together and change things.
Absolutely. You brought up both very good points. Globalization allows the entire world to communicate due to the mixing of cultures and respect for each other's cultures. But globalization also allows cultures that have already who've developed faster to exploit those who haven't had the chance to yet, as in many of the third world countries are currently being used as ways to provide resources for the first world countries. Does anyone else have a, yeah?
I think another good thing about globalization is these like countries that are under like dictatorship rule or something, and they use social media to be inspired. Like for example, the Arab Spring, when you see like Egypt and Libya.
Yeah.
A lot of that like revolution came because of the concept of globalization and seeing like Western nations and how developed they are.
Yeah, you're bringing up a point that shows where people from other cultures seem to really enjoy Western culture, and they're using Western inventions kind of like social media, which originated from, well, pretty much the Western tradition, and they're integrating it into their own culture and using it to benefit their own countries. So that's another good point of globalization.
And there's also resistance if you're talking about the Middle East. You see a lot of that today. So that kind of leads into our next question, was you guys were already like going towards the next question. Who does it benefit? Do we still need to ask that? Okay. So next question. Whose interest should we bear in mind when we assess its effects? And then we have some examples. The majority, the societies that are driving it, societies that are impacted by it, or is it possible to consider them all at the same time?
So basically, through globalization, when we're looking at these effects, who should we care more about? The people who are the dominant culture who's taking in other cultures, or the subordinate culture whose culture is. Yes?
Depends how you view it ethically. If you're really nationalistic and care about your country a lot, if you're the Western country and you're gaining a lot from it, you're going to think it's very beneficial and it's a great thing. But if you're thinking that in terms of ethics and right or wrong, and you think the exploitation is wrong, that it's a really negative thing.
Yeah, absolutely. You're bringing up the point of two perspectives, which is good. You're looking outside the Western canon. There's when you're in this dominant culture, the other culture assimilating to you doesn't seem like that bad of a thing, since once all people are under one culture, they can communicate with more efficiency. But the subordinate culture, who's losing their culture, many of them try to retain it to some effect, but oftentimes it's lost, and there's no way to prevent it, since you are living in the other culture.
Essentially, if you're saying it's wrong in the first place, it would be deontologically wrong to have this cultural blending going on. But from a consequentialist point of view, like you're saying, it might be beneficial for these cultures to exchange different aspects themselves. All right, so the AOK's, areas of knowledge that we're going to be looking at, I'm sure you guys have seen this a bunch already. So we're going to be looking at the visual arts, fashion, music, and then we're going to be, a big concept is going to be exploring why do cultural purists take offense to one medium more than the other, which happens, so that's interesting. So our first example is music, and music is interesting. A lot of music plays off of each other, and we see many genres derive from other genres. A popular one that we use is rock being derived from funk origins. So we saw like the black community messing around with funk and kind of creating that genre, and then rock kind of taking off with different aspects from funk. And then we also see, usually there's criticism around new like white rappers as an example of appropriation, where they're using this genre that kind of has deeper implications about the black society's struggles, but they're not really defending like the black community and like the recent turbulence with like different police brutality and stuff. And then an example we have to play for you right now actually is of Avril Lavigne, and she was kind of taking from Japanese influences, and it was really interesting. She was popular in Japan, but there were actually some Japanese first and second generations living in America who resisted her her popularity. So we're actually going to play that for you right now. I'm sorry if it's the most annoying thing on earth. We'll show you a few seconds. Can you stop it? This is bothering me. I can't wait for the drop. I'm sorry. I just skipped to it then. Okay. So, I don't know what you guys think of that, but well, no. Let me ask you some questions. With music, do you guys think, I'm going to go back to the Platonic value systems. Do you guys think music is intrinsically or instrumentally valuable? And intrinsically means it has value in and of itself, and instrumental means it has value outside of itself.
And I have a question for you guys. Why do you think it is that the native Japanese took literally no offense to this video? And the reception was incredibly positive, but rather the first generation Americans, Japanese people, heritage. Why do you think they took offense to it? Yes.
I think with the first and second generation Japanese, they've experienced divisions within race, racism and discrimination. And being distanced away from their cultural homeland, which is Japan, they take more the culture more like
Yeah.
personally and like that.
Yeah, that's an amazing point, honestly, because to to the first generation of any cultural heritage, they're already separated from their motherland or fatherland, and they have to guard their culture and take it more personally to sustain it in this dominant culture because they are now the subordinate culture. When you're living in Japan and you're Japanese, your culture is the dominant culture. You don't have to you don't have to worry about it being intact. When you're living in the United States as Japanese, your culture is now the subordinate culture, and that's why people, first generation Japanese, took offense to this video and
Yeah.
natives did not. It's a question of proximity, and we'll talk more about that in a second. Oh yes, and we'll talk about more about that right now. So, that's like Vanessa Hudgens, and she's wearing a bindi and some Indian-based clothes. We're also wearing Indian-based clothes, if you haven't noticed. Hunter might just be a terrible person culturally appropriating. Um, so, there's been an uproar about cultural appropriation in fashion as well, and it's also a matter of proximity. The reason that we see people getting mad about others taking aspects of their heritage as fashion is because fashion is something that you wear and something that you identify as, so it's very close to the knower. It's a lot of there are value theories in addition to the Platonic ones that we described earlier that base value around proximity to the knower. And fashion in this case is very close to the knower, and we keep calling them the knower because it's a TOK thing for the juniors. And people take personal offense to it because their culture that they wear and identify with daily is being taken by another person who doesn't identify with that culture. For example, the bindi. The reason that there's been such an uproar about that is because the bindi is a permanent symbol of marriage that you put on your forehead, and it's something that for Indian women is a symbol of maturing into womanhood. Whereas during like events like Coachella, it's simply something that you put on for the weekend and take off. So.
But they don't mean it
They don't mean
malevolently, but it kind of takes away from its original meaning. But it's interesting. So we're also just going to look at the visual arts. This is an example. This is Picasso's self-portrait. If any of you take an art history, you know this. Picasso has a lot of influence from African masks with exaggerated features, and we see this across all of his art. And I mean, it's really cool. It set off a modern movement he included in Cubism, and it's really, Picasso's really known for progressing modern art. And then we also see artists like Frida Kahlo. I don't want to stand in front of anybody. We also see artists like Frida Kahlo and other Latin artists that are creating artwork expressing like their cultural struggles or their own cultures, and that's also seen as pretty cool. So I want to go ahead and take a chance to ask you guys this question again because I didn't really get to it earlier. Do you think the visual arts are intrinsically or instrumentally valuable? Do they have value in and of itself? Can you look at them introspectively with the artist and their culture, or do they have instrumental value beyond the work itself or the movement itself? It's a broad question.
Value within the culture.
Yeah, like for the artist and for their culture, does it have value in that area, or can it also be used to influence other movements, other cultures, everybody? It's just a discussion. Yeah, Kyle?
Definitely think it's the latter. It's the latter one too because
So,
increasing-
instrumental?
yeah,
Mhm.
with increasing globalization, there's more contact between different cultures, and there's starting to influence like we see Picasso and so many other people in different forms of media and art.
Good.
You already have like 2 prizes, so I hope we can introduce you.
Oh yeah, Luis.
I think it has a little bit of both. Like, it functions both ways, not just to the artist and its culture, but also like there's also even
good. I think it's difficult for a lot of you guys to answer this because it does work both ways, and each of these can work both ways, but usually it's one way more than another due to proximity again, which is. Wait, Natalia. I don't want to get ahead of myself. Do you have something to say?
Well, personally, I like listening to Argentine tango.
All right. Yeah.
And, I can tell when the tango is made by an Argentine or by somebody else, just by the rhythm, the little details that it has. And I think that tango is something that's kind of integral in Argentine culture, but also I enjoy listening, it inspires other people, people who travel to Argentina to learn how to tango. It's a beautiful medium of expression.
Yeah. All right. Cool.
I think that also brings up there's no absolutes in perspective. Any of the absolutes that we have previously mentioned were simply for the sake of coherency. But Natalia, a firstborn or 1.5 technically generational of her heritage, enjoys. Wait, you were saying that you enjoy other people's tango, or?
Well, I like listening to Argentine tango.
Argentine tango, yeah. She likes her heritage. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Coolio. Now, let's talk about why certain. Let's talk about why certain art forms are taken more seriously in appropriation than others. When we already talked about, it's all a matter of proximity to the knower. When we talk about fashion, the art is something that they wear and identify with on a daily basis. So a lot of people take it more personally. For music, it's somewhat in the middle, because even though you don't constantly, unless you're the guy who has a boombox and is playing music constantly around you, you're not constantly identifying with the music of your culture, but you still take offense when you're separated from your culture and you see other people degrading your culture, or this what that would be considered is the dominant culture taking your music and changing it to their standards. And many people don't find offense to the arts because, in addition to being separate from the knower, art is something that can't be changed once it's on the canvas, unless someone takes it and decides to draw over it, which would be vandalizing the art. Art is already a separate piece and can be moved around, but contains all the culture with it as it goes.
Right. We already kind of talked about the other concepts and questions, so we're going to move on. Yes. All right. I kind of want to know what you guys think about this. There's this idea of indigenous intellectual property, which is, it kind of started when these Indian groups wanted to preserve their culture from a legal standpoint. So the government made some legislation that is sort of like a patent to indigenous systems, which indigenous knowledge can include herbal medicines or stuff that they use within their culture, that a lot of times you see this concept of biopiracy, and they take, larger drug companies will take the discoveries of these indigenous groups and kind of use it for their own economic benefit. So it's interesting. There's kind of an attempt to preserve this indigenous knowledge. So what do you guys think about that? Do you guys?
Hey, we still have prizes.
Yeah, we still have prizes. I mean, they're high quality. So. All right.
I think, at least for medicine, the medicine industry is $1 billion company,
Yeah.
and if they don't pay for the discovery that's already been made, that is kind of stealing a lot of money from somebody.
Yeah. The thing that we look at is, yeah.
I think acknowledgement is important. I understand if there's something that we can value the rest of the world, in terms of the medicine that the indigenous people have found, then I think people should know about it, but it shouldn't just be outright taken or stolen from these people. There should be acknowledgement.
Yeah, that's the thing. They want credit because a lot of these medicines they've been developing for thousands of years, testing, and they don't get any credit, and it's being on the market, and it's also hard to ethically justify, not allowing people to share this knowledge freely and use it for their benefit. And then there's the other obvious glaring problem that it might be unrealistic to preserve every aspect of indigenous knowledge, especially on a legal scale. It gets kind of crazy. So we're kind of wrapping it up. The purpose of our presentation, our aim was to look at how cultural appropriation might be harmful, and then where it can be seen, just so there's like awareness. It's not always intentional, but we see the attempt that I just talked about mitigating appropriation, and usually those attempts are futile because, like I said, they're either unethical or unrealistic. But on a personal level, you can make an attempt to appreciate others' culture. And then I kind of talked about this in the last slide. All right, so in conclusion, we see that the line between appropriation and exploitation can most easily be drawn using proximity value theories. So like we were talking about, music and the arts are more distant and they have value outside of their own significance. There's room for interpretation. Those cultural exchange between those areas don't normally cause offense to people's own values. But something like fashion that you're wearing that hold close to yourself, that represents maybe like people dressing up in like tribal outfits and Halloween, might be stripping away from like the significance of being a chief in a tribe, just stuff like that. And then we talk about how instrumental and intrinsic can categorize appropriation, which kind of has to do again with proximity. And then, do you want to wrap it up? Yeah. Okay, I'll just go ahead. So, yeah, questions? Mm-hmm.
How do you think someone can, like, appreciate a culture without it becoming, appropriation?
Easy. Yeah. So, yeah, anybody can take aspects from really any culture, so long as you're recognizing the significance behind that culture. So long as you're not idolizing or trivializing the culture, trivializing is a better word. As long as you're not trivializing the culture by wearing it without having any knowledge of like what it means or what you're doing, or if you're kind of just like.
Yeah, by having contextual knowledge about the aspects of the heritage that you were borrowing from, you can better gauge whether it be offensive to the person from that culture or not. And by understanding the context of the culture itself, you're already giving credit and recognition to the culture that you're taking from. So you're no longer pressing that culture by taking and decontextualizing an aspect of the culture, but you're taking and appreciating and just enjoying the culture.
Yeah. It's beneficial to appreciate cultures, but it's also cool to be aware of the implications behind cultures and that you may be taking away from the value. So that's the point.
Yeah.
So we're done.